Good morning. Welcome. Thanks for joining us here this morning. So glad you could take some time out of your morning for Facebook Live. My name is Philip Leo, and I'm Church Communications Director here at Barnabas Foundation. I'm thinking on renaming my position to Church Guy.
I like that.
Or Church Dude or something like that. We're going to be talking about practicing God's presence, one church's story, and that church is Palos Heights Christian Reformed Church. And I have with me the senior pastor from Palos CRC, Greg Janke. Thanks, Greg, for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Phil. Appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate your time. I know it's a busy week for you, and appreciate you too working with me on this. It's been fun. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. We've talked a little bit, of course, about this leading up to this. I heard about what your church was doing because my mother attends at your church.
Right.
And I was really intrigued because what happens is that a lot of attention goes to spiritual disciplines. I broke my pen. A lot of attention goes to spiritual disciplines. And a lot of content out there has to do with individual spiritual disciplines. Right. And we don't really know that much or how to do corporate spiritual disciplines, practicing God's presence together as a church. And so when I saw this story, I wanted to be able to share it with others. So maybe a good way to start is to talk about how your church started to think about practicing God's presence. I know you were telling me it had to do with just the basic pace of living in sort of 21st century.
Yeah, probably about a year ago, our ministry leadership began talking about conversations around, really around discipleship, and particularly the challenge that discipleship that we face with discipling, in particular young people who we only see once or twice a month. Right. Because they're so busy. And then we started thinking a bit more broadly about that, and we started thinking about the adults that their parents and grandparents even, and other adults in our congregation as well, recognizing that everybody's busy. Everybody's overcommitted, everybody's overwhelmed, everybody's got a to-do list every day of far more than they could ever hope to accomplish.
Right.
And so we started thinking about how is it that we can sort of reorient, refocus, rethink things around discipleship, and come back to a life that's more centered around Christ, which we're called to do. I mean, we're called to live that way. And recognize that everybody every day is presented with all kinds of opportunities and choices that are really good. I mean, life is full of good stuff, work and family and recreation and a host of other things. Right. But those things really, really quickly become the focus of life. Everything gets centered around those things. And then we're living differently. And so we were thinking about how do we come back? How do we call people back? How do we help people come back to a life more centered around Christ? That's what
Wow.
gave rise to it.
Wow. Well, I mentioned right when I started about resources around practicing the presence of God, spiritual disciplines. This topic gets a lot of play today, as well it should, because faith formation, spiritual growth is the lifeblood of the Christian community. So when it comes to resources, there's a lot geared towards the individual and personal practices of spiritual disciplines. Right. What about when it comes to corporate practices? What's out there? Or I'm going to put you're the expert. You can tell us everything that's out there on it.
Yeah. Then you should find somebody else, because there's just not a lot. We certainly can't claim to be experts.
No.
Really can't even claim to be all that terribly successful. We recognized an issue within our own congregation, right, and then tried to find a way to address it. You're right. There just aren't a lot of resources for sort of corporate, at least not in terms of what we found.
Right.
So if they're out there, let us know, because we're looking for stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
What we did do, this conversation that we started led us to a book written by Chuck DeGroat. Chuck teaches pastoral care, pastoral counseling at Western Seminary in Holland. And he has a book that he wrote a few years back called Wholeheartedness. And as we began to read that together, our ministry leadership, and began thinking about what it means to live wholehearted lives, that served as the catalyst for this, and beginning to think about that. And so as we thought about what we were going to do, about what our practice was going to be together, we sort of settled on a one-day event, and we'll probably come back to that a little later. But in terms of resources, we picked some sort of breakout themes for that day. We picked 4 of them, and then we started looking at what kind of resources we might have around those particular ideas and themes. And there are some things out there. One of the things themes that we picked up was storytelling, the importance of telling our stories. And Christian Reformed Church Faith Formation has some really good toolkits, they call them. And one of them is the Telling Your Story toolkit. Oh, wow. And so we took a look at that. Simple stuff. It's all available online. And we started looking at some of the resources within that that we could use for our particular situation. And so we took resources. We had leaders for each of these sub themes, and they began to explore and sort of we took what resources were available and began to think about how we can use them in a group setting and use them to encourage group participation.
Cool. So cool. I think I want to ask you in a minute about the storytelling part of that, but it, you're right on as far as if there are folks that are aware of resources that can be used for corporate church life related to practicing God's presence. If you know what they are, don't hesitate to message me on Facebook, point me in the right direction, and then I can share them with other folks. So you have to come up with a plan. You have to figure out what you're going to do. What does that look like? How'd that play out for you?
Yeah, as we were in this conversation together about how do we address, and like I said, the real driving force for us was discipleship.
Okay.
And recognizing that this busy pace of life, this sort of overcommittedness of life, really had significant impacts on discipleship. And so as we were talking about that, the first thing you don't want to do is you don't want to add more to people's plate. So here's one more thing you can do. That just didn't seem like a wise approach. So what we ended up settling on, in sort of our starting point for this was, let's do one day. Let's do what we, not real creative. We just called it a day of renewal.
Okay.
But that one day was going to be our target. We asked people to commit to just one Sunday, the whole day. And it actually ended up being about 7 hours or so, including bookended with worship. But in that day, really be focused on what does it mean to live as wholehearted followers of Jesus. Because so much of the sense that life is spiraling out of control that people have, that's part of the thesis of this book, Wholehearted, is that we live divided lives. We've got all of these things that we're pursuing, and there's nothing at the center. And we talk about Christ being at the center, but we're not really practicing things that help us keep him at the center.
Yeah.
And so everything sort of feels out of control. We feel like we're overwhelmed. So what are some things that we can help people begin to live wholeheartedly in their lives? Right. And so the worship centered around that, but we also had 4 sort of sub themes that that drove us during the day.
Okay.
One of them was developing a personal or family spiritual or mission statement.
Okay.
And the idea is, okay, if Christ is going to be the center of my life,
Right.
how am I going to structure and how am I going to make decisions and choices based on that? And so, well, let's begin to think about how do we approach life, sort of a mission-oriented life.
Right.
And so as opportunities come along, people can make choices, but it's based on this sort of foundational mission statement of who I am in Christ and so on. The other piece was storytelling. Another of the section was storytelling and the recognition that we have to be able to tell stories to one another. We have to be able to support each other. The way we do that is through story. We share what's really important to us through story. And so how do we begin to tell those to one another? And so we practice that together, which was, I wasn't part of that. I was leading one of the other sessions, but I heard it went really well, but really put people in, moved them out of their comfort zone.
Sure.
So,
Sure. Yeah.
Another thing that we talked about was the embracing imperfections. We live in a society that we're trying to perfect ourselves to death, and recognizing that our perfection isn't in being the do-it-all parent, perfect employee, all those things. Our perfection is in Christ. And so the idea of sort of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be,
right,
so that we can truly live into who we are in Christ.
Right.
And then the fourth piece was actually practicing the presence of Christ. How do we develop disciplines and routines in our life daily, throughout the course of the day, so that every day is structured around, every day sort of is oriented around this core relationship that we have with Christ. Because there's all these other things that push in and want to be the center. They want to be the thing that's most important. And so we have to develop a life and a structure of life that is that sort of constantly calls us back to that core commitment. So those were sort of the four pieces that we worked on. We also led up to this through the course of the summer. This day actually was just a little over a week ago. We did it on Sunday, September 8th.
Okay.
And so leading up to that for the summer, we spent a summer really focused on prayer and sort of bathing life in prayer together. And so everything was leading up to it had to do with prayer. And then from that, how do we now get recentered and refocused on Christ? So those are some of the things that we did with the day. There have been some things that we have tried to do corporately, longer term. They've had a slightly little longer history in our life. One of which is recognize the importance of seeing God at work in the world and in our lives and the lives of people around us. So trying to build into even things like our regular meetings, our elders meetings and council meetings and so on. Really some time where we can share together, where have you seen God at work? What has God been doing today, this week, in your work, in your family? So that becomes a spiritual practice that we're doing together, where we're sharing the stories of what God is doing. So those are some of the things that we've done.
Just listening to you, I don't think it can be, the importance of this can be overstated. In today's world. And as you're describing, and where does this happen? Who is the voice calling us to this as a gathered body of believers? So that role, that task is really, really, really critical. And the leadership at your church, including you, that's phenomenal. And I just want to say thanks for doing that. That is so cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
It's a rare thing in today's world, and so very, very important. we've sort of talked a little bit about the challenges of this sort of thing in community. Are there any others that come to mind for you? Even think going forward as you think about anything come to mind at all?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we recognize that we have is where do we go from here?
Yeah,
I mean, we did this. Right. It's sort of like you have this moment together, and we had really pretty good participation from within our congregation for this. So we're really thankful for that. But then it's like, okay, now what? Yeah. And so how do we continue the process? So one of the things that we did with each of those sort of key breakout sessions was we really tried to focus, because we didn't have a ton of time. And so we were really trying to keep the learning component to a minimum, and provide people both an opportunity to engage with the topics, and beginning to talk together about their own experiences and practices and so on. But then also leave those short moments with here's one or two or at most three things that I could begin to do that I'm not doing currently. So the practicing the presence, having to do with identifying points in time through the course of the day. So not just, so when you talk about personal worship practices, people usually think about, well, my personal devotions. And well, I do that at 6:30 in the morning at the beginning of the day. Well, what about the rest of the day? How's the rest of the day being shaped around? Because we all know, I mean, the day gets, it's full and we've got tons of stuff doing. And if your parents are carting your kids all over, all of that stuff. So beginning to think about my whole day, and where in my whole day can I find 5 or 10 minutes throughout the course of the day? So maybe it's before your coffee break in the morning. Maybe you've got a break in the afternoon in your routine, whatever it might be, but finding 4, 5, 6, even more times during the course of the day where I can really focus on being in God's presence. And then what am I going to do in those times? And so here's a bunch of options or a bunch of different ways you can do that, and resources. And even in the discussion in that group, people were sharing resources together. Oh, I use this app. There's this thing that I found online. And so people are writing that down and scribbling it down. Well, now through the course of my day, maybe I use this early, I use this app in the afternoon, and so beginning to think now, how can I actually put that into practice tomorrow, Monday morning, and Tuesday and Wednesday, and so on.
I like the idea of sharing practical ideas and practices that people do and utilize during the course of a week, because you're not always in context where these are being shared, right? No. People keep these practices to themselves, but what if we got in a room and what if we shared what we do and we could learn from each other, you know?
And that really is one of the challenges to the, practicing the presence, these disciplines together, is this sort of American cultural value that spirituality is private.
Right.
And so we don't talk that much about it. We don't do those kind of things.
Right.
And so, this was an opportunity to share and to actually learn from each other and find out others are doing it.
That's pretty cool.
That was cool.
You're sitting in the Barnabas Foundation building, and we're talking about spiritual disciplines. So
what's a beautiful building?
Right. What's the connection, right? Why are we having this at Barnabas Foundation? And I want to make sure that I just mention in the context of this conversation that from our perspective, we've always held that generous giving is a discipleship issue. Yeah. And when I think about it in terms of one of the questions that we wanted to talk about, what are the payoffs? And I don't mean to be really like crude by saying that, but I'm just saying, like, in terms of what are the payoffs in terms of corporate practice of the presence of God? Well, it's forming fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. And from our perspective at Barnabas, one of the results of that ends up being in generosity and generous giving.
Yeah. In terms of our congregation, our vision, part of our vision is to make and equip passionate followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
That's what we want to do. And so we saw this as a way to doing that and to equipping people that way. So we were thinking about what's going to be next. I mean, it's not enough to have this moment. It's how's this going to impact, and not even so much individual people.
Right.
And again, American sort of cultural value is it's individual, it's private, and so on.
Right.
But we're part of a body together. We're part of a community together. So as we think about, and as we, even already, I think to a small degree, short amount of time, obviously, have experienced in terms of benefits and outcomes from this, I really do think that it has strengthened the community and has that sort of ability to create a deeper, richer community life. And that includes worship,
Yep.
that includes fellowship, it also includes stewardship.
Yep. Yep.
Because that's part of our life together, is how we steward our resources together. And so this has the potential of beginning to deepen that community life. I think doing it together, and even having this moment together where we had really a good chunk of our congregation participating in this day of renewal creates an opportunity for mutual accountability because we're doing it together. Mm-hmm. And hey, you shared that story or you were talking about that. I tried that and this is what my experience was.
Right.
And so that mutual accountability. And I think it strengthens our witness within the community and to one another. If we are actually living Christ-centered lives and doing that intentionally, that then becomes a witness to the broader community.
Yeah.
So
that is so good. So here's the thing: is I'm keeping my eyes on you. I want to see what's next for you guys. And again, I just want to thank you for that leadership and. I just think it's really, really cool. And I'll just say again to folks that are joining us, if you have comments or questions or resources or things like that, if you want to just check on here, I want to see if anyone has posted any questions. And I see some comments, but I don't see any. Oh yeah, there was a question, but that was answered already. So yeah, we're good. I want to mention a couple of things to you before we sign off here. One is the fall issue of Generosity Today should be coming out next month, I believe. Keep an eye out for that. That goes to every Christian Reformed Church office. It's called Generosity Today. Comes as an email, but it also includes a PDF that can be reproduced and put in church mailboxes. It can be shared with your church. And it is designed to promote generous giving in your church. So please keep an eye out for it. Some of you will be joining me in Grand Rapids next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm really looking forward to the Generous Church Conference. So excited about all the possibilities there. So I will see some of you in Grand Rapids next week. Also, if you're interested in sharing this conversation with another leader at your church, somebody that you know would benefit from it, we'll edit this, we'll repost, and also we'll put it out as a podcast, and it'll be on YouTube as well. So you'll be able to share this with others. Again, Greg, thanks for the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And God bless you all. Thanks for joining us here on Facebook Live. Have a good day.